Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was infused with gamma energy like the Hulk? Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world, for Izuku Midoriya, was measured in decibels of derision. There was the low, dismissive chuckle of his classmates when he muttered his analyses of heroes. There was the sharp, contemptuous sneer of the teachers who saw his quirklessness as a defect of character, not just biology. And then there was the loudest sound of all, the crackling, explosive roar of Katsuki Bakugo's palms, a percussive symphony of superiority that had been the soundtrack to Izuku's life for a decade. Today, however, was meant to be different. Today was a quiet rebellion. The hum of the magnetically levitated bus was a gentle, soothing drone, a world away from the usual cacophony of Aldera Junior High. Their class was on a field trip, a rare and coveted excursion to the newly opened Takami Energy Research Center on the outskirts of Mizurufu. It was a place of gleaming chrome and pristine glass, a monument to the future. It was run by Associates of Ireland, a name that made Izuku's hero-loving heart flutter with reverence. They weren't just studying quirks. They were studying the fundamental forces of the universe, trying to develop clean quirk energy alternatives. For Izuku, it was a glimpse into a world where intelligence and dedication mattered more than the genetic lottery. A world where he might, just maybe, have a place. He scribbled furiously in his notebook, the pen scratching a frantic rhythm. The facility's primary power source appears to be a next-gen tokamak reactor, but the brochure mentions a secondary, experimental core. Project Chimera. They claim it can synthesize stable energy from previously volatile radiation sources. Gamma radiation? That's incredibly dangerous, but the potential for clean, city-wide power generation is. Still scribbling in that creepy notebook, Deku? The voice was a familiar explosion, popping the peaceful bubble of the bus. Izuku flinched, instinctively hunching his shoulders as he looked up. Bakugo was leaning over the seat, his crimson eyes narrowed in a permanent state of irritation. His two cronies, as always, flanked him like vultures. Keikaken, Izuku stammered, trying to slide the notebook under his thigh. I was just taking notes. It's interesting. It's pathetic, Bakugo sneered, snatching the book with lightning speed. What's a quirkless loser like you gonna do with this crap? You trying to think your way into being a hero? He flipped through the pages, his lip curling in disgust at the detailed drawings and meticulous analysis. Look at this. Gamma reactor safety protocols. You really think you'll ever be anywhere important enough to need to know this, you damn nerd? Laughter rippled through the nearby seats. Izuku's face burned with a familiar, helpless shame. He could feel his hands clenching into useless fists under the seat. Give it back, Kaken. Bakugo held the notebook just out of reach. Make me. He let a tiny, sharp pop of an explosion erupt from his palm, scorching the corner of the cover. The smell of burnt paper and caramel filled the air. It was a warning. A reminder of the order of things. Izuku deflated, the fight draining out of him as it always did. Please. With a final huff of disgust, Bakugo tossed the notebook back onto Izuku's lap. Just stay out of my way today, Deku. Don't embarrass the school by drooling all over the place. He turned away, the conversation over, leaving Izuku to stare at the blackened edge of his notebook. It was a tiny scar, but it felt like it was branded on his soul. He spent the rest of the ride in silence, the hum of the bus no longer soothing, but a low-grade thrum of anxiety. The Takami Center was even more impressive up close. It was a cathedral of science, all soaring white walls and impossibly large windows that looked out over the glittering bay. Their tour guide, a cheerful woman with a mild telekinetic quirk she used to gesture at holographic displays, led them through corridors that hummed with contained power. Izuku was in a state of controlled awe, forcing himself to stay at the back of the group to avoid Bakugo. He absorbed every word, every diagram, his mind racing to connect the concepts. They saw the primary fusion reactor, a colossal, donut-shaped machine suspended in a magnetic field, its core a miniature, captured star. It was beautiful, terrifying, and the pinnacle of human achievement. But Izuku's attention kept drifting to the smaller, heavily shielded corridor they were led past. A thick, lead-lined door bore a stark, yellow and black radiation symbol and the words, Gamma core containment level 5 clearance only. And this, the guide said, gesturing vaguely towards the door, is the heart of Project Chimera. I can't take you inside, of course. It's one of the most secure and potentially hazardous places on the planet. But inside that chamber, our top scientists, led by the brilliant Dr. Eris Thorne, are pioneering a method to stabilize and draw energy directly from a concentrated gamma radiation source. A student raised their hand. Isn't that like what made the Hulk in old comic books? The guide laughed, a practiced, reassuring sound. A fun piece of pre-quirk fiction. But I assure you, our safety protocols are foolproof. The energy levels we're dealing with are immense, but the containment field is absolute. The work Dr. Thorne is doing could end the energy crisis forever. Izuku stared at the door, a shiver running down his spine that had nothing to do with the facility's air conditioning. The sheer, raw power held behind that metal slab was beyond comprehension. A power that, in stories, created monsters. The tour moved on, but Izuku's gaze lingered. He felt a strange pull, a morbid curiosity that he couldn't quite shake. They were in the main observation deck, a grand, multi-level atrium overlooking the primary reactor, when the world shattered. It started not with a bang, but with a scream. One of the security guards at the entrance suddenly contorted, his body flickering like a bad hologram, before crumbling into a pile of gray dust. Panic erupted. A wave of terror washed through the atrium as a man strode through the now unguarded entrance. He was thin and wiry, dressed in drab, patched-up clothing. His eyes burned with a feverish, desperate light. His hands glowed with a sickly gray energy. "No one move!" he shrieked, his voice cracking with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. "I am Entropy. And today, I'm going to unmake this monument to your arrogant society." His quirk was horrifyingly simple. Anything he touched with his glowing hands ceased to exist. He tapped a nearby decorative pillar, and it dissolved into cascading particles of nothingness. The students screamed, a chaotic stampede beginning as they tried to flee. "I said don't move!" Entropy roared. He waved a hand and the main exit doors turned to dust, cutting off the escape route. Izuku was frozen, his mind a whirlwind of fear and analysis. Villain attack. Quirk, disintegration, touch-based. He's C-list at best. I've never seen him in the hero logs. His motive is theatrical. He wants attention. He's unstable. Target. Likely the main reactor to cause the biggest explosion, make the biggest name for himself. The analysis was cold, detached, a defense mechanism against the paralyzing terror that threatened to consume him. He saw Bakugo, for the first time in his life, look uncertain. His quirk was powerful, but it was useless if he couldn't get close. Touching this man meant oblivion. The teachers were trying to herd the students away, towards the emergency exits on the far side of the atrium. But Entropy wasn't focused on them. His wild eyes scanned the facility, and a crazed grin spread across his face as he spotted the lead-lined corridor. "Ah," he whispered, a sound filled with awe and madness. "Project Chimera. They said it was a bomb waiting to go off. Perfect." He started towards the corridor, his hands glowing brighter. The remaining security guards tried to intercept him, but he was like a phantom of death. A touch to a stun baton, and it vanished. A graze on an arm, and the limb disintegrated, the guard screaming as he fell. It was a nightmare. Izuku was being pulled along with the crowd, his feet moving on autopilot. Run. Hide. Wait for a hero. That was the mantra of the quirkless. That was the rule of survival. Then he saw her, Dr. Eris Thorne. She must have come out of a nearby lab to investigate the commotion. She was a woman in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes behind her glasses and a white lab coat over her jumpsuit. She was trying to get to a security console, her fingers flying across the screen, likely attempting to initiate a lockdown. Entropy saw her too. "No, no, no," he sang, "no heroes spoiling my debut." He lunged, not at her, but at the ceiling support above the console. His gray hand touched the reinforced steel beam, and a massive section of the ceiling simply ceased to be. The structure groaned, and a multi-ton slab of concrete and wiring broke free, plummeting directly towards the console, and towards Dr. Thorne. She looked up, her face a mask of pure terror. She was frozen. Paralyzed. Time seemed to slow down for Izuku. He saw the falling debris. He saw the trapped scientist. He heard the distant, approaching wail of sirens, but they were too far away. He saw the other students running. He saw Bakugo hesitating, his face a conflict of pride and self-preservation. He saw a dozen possible outcomes, and in all of them, Dr. Thorne died. And then, his legs moved on their own. There was no thought. No analysis. Just a primal, desperate scream in his soul that said, "A person needs help." He broke from the fleeing crowd, his worn red sneakers pounding against the polished floor. He was a scrawny, quirkless boy running towards a collapsing ceiling, towards a villain who could unmake him with a touch. It was illogical. It was insane. It was suicide. "DKU, you idiot!" Bakugo's roar was distant, drowned out by the blood pounding in Izuku's ears. He reached Dr. Thorne a second before the debris did. He didn't have the strength to push her out of the way. There wasn't time. So he did the only thing he could. He threw his small body over hers, curling into a protective ball, his arms covering his head. A silent, desperate prayer on his lips. He expected to be crushed. He expected pain, then darkness. He did not expect the world to turn green. Entropy, in his manic rush towards the Gamma Core, had placed a hand on the control panel for the containment door, disintegrating the locking mechanism. The failsafes, damaged by the collapsing ceiling, sputtered and died. With a hydraulic hiss and a deafening groan, the 10-foot-thick lead door slid open a few inches. From the crack, an energy unlike anything in nature bled out. It wasn't just light, it was a physical presence. A wave of pure, weaponized creation and destruction. The air itself crackled, smelling of ozone and something ancient, something stellar. And as the ceiling collapsed, it didn't just fall. The cascading concrete struck the damaged exterior plating of the gamma reactor's housing. It was a final, fatal blow to a system already pushed to its brink. The reactor went critical. A silent, blinding wave of emerald energy erupted from the breach. It wasn't a heatwave. It was a wave of pure information, of raw power, rewriting everything it touched. Entropy, standing closest, was the first to go. He didn't even have time to scream. The disintegration quirk that defined him was itself unmade. His atoms were ripped apart and forcibly reassembled into something new and unstable for a nanosecond before he was simply erased from existence, vaporized by a power that dwarfed his own. The wave washed over the debris pile where Izuku was shielding Dr. Thorne. The concrete and steel that should have crushed them were atomized. The wave hit Izuku's back, and for a timeless instant, he felt an agony beyond comprehension. It felt like every cell in his body was being set on fire, torn apart, and simultaneously slammed back together. It was the pain of death and rebirth happening millions of times a second. He was being unwritten and rewritten. His scream was lost in the silent, emerald apocalypse. He felt his bones liquefy and reform. He felt his DNA unravel and braid itself back into a new, monstrous shape. The last thing he saw before the light consumed him was the terrified face of Dr. Thorne beneath him, completely untouched, shielded from the blast by his own irradiated body. Then, there was only a blinding, green silence. The first sensation was sound, muffled and distant, as if he were underwater. A rhythmic, insistent beeping. The second was a feeling. A low, constant hum deep in his bones. It was a vibration that seemed to emanate from the very core of his being, a quiet thrum of immense, sleeping power. It felt alien. It felt wrong. Izuku's eyes fluttered open. The world was a blurry mess of white. A ceiling. Sterile. The beeping was louder now. He turned his head, a wave of dizziness washing over him. He was in a hospital room, not a normal one. The walls seemed to be lined with some kind of dense, metallic material. A thick pane of glass separated him from an observation room where several people in what looked like hazmat suits were speaking frantically. Vital signs are stable. Impossibly stable. The cellular regeneration is off the charts. He should be a puddle of cooked flesh. Instead, his tissues are rebuilding faster than we can skin them. And the energy readings, he's saturated. Every cell in his body is drenched in gamma radiation, but he's not just hosting it. He's metabolized it. It's part of him now. Izuku tried to sit up, but a gentle hand pushed him back down. He blinked, his vision clearing. His mother, Inko Midoriya, was sitting by his bedside, her face a mess of tear tracks, red-rimmed eyes, and an expression of such profound, terrified relief that it made his own heart ache. "Izuku! Oh, my baby!" she sobbed, clutching his hand. "You're awake! The doctors, they didn't know if you would ever—" "Mom?" His voice was a dry rasp. What happened?" "There was an accident," she said, her voice trembling. "A villain attack at the research center. The ceiling, it collapsed. You saved that woman, Izuku. Dr. Thorne. She told everyone. You pushed her out of the way. They said you shielded her from the worst of it." She was fudging the details, he realized. Protecting him from the truth of what he'd done. He hadn't pushed her. He had covered her. He remembered the green light. The pain. The reactor? He whispered. Inko's face clouded over. There was a breach. An energy surge. The doctors here at the National Quarantine Hospital say it's a miracle you're alive. They've never seen anything like it. He looked down at himself. There wasn't a scratch on him. No burns. No broken bones. He should be dead. He knew he should be dead. He felt fine. Better than fine. The constant fatigue that had been his companion for years was gone. The aches and pains of 1,000 schoolyard beatings were absent. All that remained was the hum. That deep, internal vibration, a sleeping giant in his blood. The days that followed were a blur of tests. Doctors in radiation suits drew his blood. It was a startlingly vivid emerald green before oxidizing to red in the syringe, scanned his body, and asked him endless questions. How did he feel? Did he notice anything different? They spoke to him in calm, placating tones, but he could see the nervous energy behind their visors. They were studying a specimen, a biological impossibility. Dr. Thorne visited him once. She stood behind the glass, her face etched with gratitude and awe. You have the heart of a true hero, Izuku Midoriya, she had said, her voice piped in through a speaker. What you did was the bravest thing I have ever seen. Her words should have filled him with pride. Instead, they just made the pit in his stomach grow deeper. He hadn't been brave. He had been stupid. He had just run. And now, he was this. A freak. A lab rat. On the 5th day, he got another visitor. The door to his quarantine room slid open, and Katsuki Bakugo swaggered in. He wasn't wearing a mask or a protective suit, a clear sign the doctors had finally deemed Izuku non-radioactive to be around. He looked Izuku up and down, a complicated expression on his face. A mixture of annoyance, disbelief, and something else Izuku couldn't quite place. So, Bakugo started, his voice dripping with its usual condescension. You're not dead. Izuku sat up straighter in his bed. Kaken. The whole school's talking about it, Bakugo continued, beginning to pace around the small room like a caged tiger. How useless Deku tried to play hero and got himself fried. They're calling you a moron, a wannabe who got lucky. He stopped at the foot of the bed and leaned forward, his red eyes boring into Izuku's. But you're not just lucky, are you? You saved that scientist lady. You took a collapsing ceiling and a reactor meltdown to the face, and you don't have a damn scratch on you. So what is it, huh? You been hiding a quirk all this time? A regeneration quirk? Was it all just a big lie to make me look bad? The accusation was so fundamentally Bakugo that Izuku almost felt a wave of normalcy wash over him. Almost. No, Kaken, Izuku said quietly. I'm quirkless. The doctors don't know why I survived. Bullshit. Bakugo slammed his hand down on the metal railing of the bed, making Izuku jump. There's no such thing as a quirkless person surviving that. You think I'm an idiot? Stop lying to me, Deku. The injustice of it stung. After everything, after a lifetime of being told he was worthless for having no power, now he was being accused of lying about it. The fear and confusion of the past few days, the constant prodding from doctors, the deep, unsettling hum in his veins, it all began to curdle into a hot, unfamiliar feeling in his chest. Anger. I'm not lying. Izuku shot back, his voice rising. I don't know what happened. I woke up here. You've always been a liar and a crybaby. Bakugo snarled, moving closer. He loomed over Izuku, radiating menace. You're a pebble on the side of the road, but you're always in my way. Whatever this new trick of yours is, it doesn't change anything. You're still just a freak. A lab rat. You're still beneath me. You're still just a useless Deku. Each word was a hammer blow. Freak. Lab rat. Useless. Something inside Izuku snapped. It wasn't a conscious thought. It was a raw, primal surge of emotion. Years of repressed rage, of swallowed insults, of enduring pain, all of it ignited by the trauma of the last week. The quiet hum in his blood suddenly roared to life, becoming a deafening crescendo. A hot, green fire flooded his veins, his vision tinged with emerald. For a split second, he felt a strength coiling in his muscles that could shatter the entire room. Get out, he growled, the words feeling alien in his own mouth. Bakugo was taken aback by the sudden venom in his tone. What did you say to? I said get out. As Izuku yelled, his eyes flashed with a brilliant, fierce emerald light. It wasn't a reflection, it was a light from within, feral and furious. Simultaneously, the heart monitor beside his bed, which had been beeping steadily, let out a piercing shriek. The screen blazed with frantic, impossible lines before the machine itself gave a loud crack. A spider web of fractures appeared on the screen, and with a fizz of sparks, it died. The room was plunged into an unnerving silence, broken only by Bakugo's sharp intake of breath. Bakugo stared from the shattered monitor to Izuku. He had seen the flash in his eyes. He had felt the sudden, oppressive shift in the room's atmosphere. He saw something in Izuku's expression he had never seen before, not fear, not tears, but pure, unadulterated rage. And for the first time in his life, Katsuki Bakugo felt a sliver of genuine, primal fear. He didn't say another word. He just backed away slowly, his eyes wide, before turning and practically fleeing the room. The green tint in Izuku's vision faded. The roaring in his blood subsided back to a low hum. He was left panting, his heart hammering against his ribs. He looked at his hands. They were trembling. He looked at the broken monitor, the acrid smell of burnt electronics filling his nostrils. Did I do that? The doctors rushed in moments later, alerted by the monitor's failure. They saw the broken machine and Izuku's panic state, and their professional calm finally cracked. Whispers of uncontrolled energy discharge and electromagnetic pulse followed him as they sedated him. 2 days later, they discharged him. The official explanation was post-traumatic stress manifesting as a temporary, stress-induced electromagnetic quirk. It was a lie, and everyone knew it. It was a label, a box to put the anomaly in so they could file it away. The head doctor, a stern man with tired eyes, gave him a final, stark warning before he left. Midoriya, we don't know what that energy did to you. On paper, you are perfectly healthy, but what happened with that monitor? It indicates an instability. Your body is a biological unknown. You need to avoid strong emotional states. Stress. Anger. Fear. We don't know what the consequences could be. The words echoed in his mind on the quiet car ride home with his mother. Avoid strong emotional states. How was he supposed to do that? His entire life was a strong emotional state. He walked into his bedroom, a shrine to the man he had always wanted to be. All Might's heroic grin beamed down from a dozen posters on the wall. The symbol of peace, a beacon of control, strength, and hope. Izuku walked to the full-length mirror on his closet door and stared at his reflection. He looked the same. Scrawny, freckled, with a mess of green-black hair. But his eyes were different. There was a depth to them now, a shadow. As he stared, he thought he could see the faintest flicker of emerald light, a ghost of the power lurking beneath the surface. The hum was still there. A permanent houseguest in his soul. He had gone to the Takami Center as Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless, useless Deku. He had left it as something else entirely. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't even normal. He was a container for a chaotic, unknown power that lashed out when he was angry. He was a time bomb. He clutched the All Might figurine on his desk, its plastic smile a cruel mockery of his new reality. His dream of becoming a hero felt further away than ever. He had a power now, a terrifying, uncontrollable power born from an accident. But it didn't feel like a gift. It felt like a curse. Alone in his room, surrounded by the symbols of his shattered dreams, Izuku Midoriya felt a loneliness more profound and terrifying than he had ever known. He was no longer just quirkless. He was a monster, waiting for the anger to let it out. The weeks following Izuku's return from the hospital were a masterclass in controlled breathing. He measured his life in inhales and exhales, a constant, desperate attempt to keep a lid on the simmering pot within him. The world, once a place of passive observation, had become a minefield of potential triggers. Every dropped book in the hallway, every scornful laugh from a classmate, every near miss on the crowded morning train was a spark threatening to ignite the powder keg in his soul. He was walking on eggshells in his own skin. The hum was his constant companion. It was no longer a gentle vibration but a low, predatory growl in the marrow of his bones. It was the baseline of his existence now, a current of restless energy that buzzed just beneath his consciousness. When he was calm, it was a distant thrum, the sound of a sleeping leviathan. But when his emotions spiked, the hum would rise in pitch and intensity, a physical pressure building behind his eyes and in his chest, demanding release. At school, he became a ghost. He kept his head down, his gaze fixed on his desk, his muttering silenced. He couldn't risk the analysis anymore. His fascination with quirks was too closely tied to the adrenaline of hero fights, and he feared that excitement could be just as dangerous as anger. Writing was a new torture. He had to hold his pencil with the delicate precision of a bomb disposal expert. Twice in the first week, a simple moment of frustration over a math problem had resulted in a fountain of splintered wood and graphite dust as the pencil simply ceased to exist in his clenched fist. The second time, the sharp snap had drawn the attention of the entire class, including the cold, crimson eyes of Katsuki Bakugo. Izuku had spent the rest of the day with his hands tucked under his legs, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Home, which should have been his sanctuary, had become another source of anxiety. His mother, Inko, tried her best, bless her heart. She tiptoed around him, her every movement radiating a gentle, heartbreaking worry. She made his favorite meal, katsudon, but he was so terrified of his own strength that he held his chopsticks with trembling fingers, convinced they would shatter. While helping her wash the dishes one evening, a plate slipped from his soapy hands. His reflexes, now unnaturally fast, allowed him to catch it, but his grip was too tight. A network of hairline fractures spread across the ceramic with a sickening creak. He stared at it, horrified, as Inko gently took the ruined plate from his hands, her smile watery and strained. "It's all right, Izuku," she had whispered, though her eyes betrayed her fear. It was an old plate anyway. He saw the lie. He saw the terror she was trying so hard to hide for his sake. And the guilt was a physical weight, pressing down on him, making the hum in his bones grow louder. He was a danger to her, to the one person in the world who had always loved him unconditionally. He tried to manage it. He spent hours in his room, not looking at hero forums, but at websites on meditation and anger management. Breathe in for 4 seconds. Hold for 7. Exhale for 8. He would sit on the floor, his eyes closed, and tried to find a center, a point of stillness within the internal storm. But it was like trying to find silence in the heart of a hurricane. The hum was always there, a constant reminder of the monster chained within his DNA. He began to fear sleep. His dreams were vivid, terrifying nightmares painted in shades of violent green. He dreamed of the accident, of the silent, world-altering wave of energy. He dreamed of running through the city, a giant, hulking version of himself, with skyscrapers like toys at his feet. In these dreams, he felt a terrifying sense of freedom, of unbridled power, and he would wake up in a cold sweat, his body thrumming with residual energy, convinced his bed frame was about to buckle under some unconscious surge of strength. The only thing that kept him tethered was his analysis, now turned inward. He documented his condition in a new, secret notebook, one he kept hidden under a loose floorboard in his room. Entry 12, Subject Self. Condition, Gamma Saturation. Observed phenomena, increased baseline strength and reflexes. Cellular regeneration appears to be constant and rapid. Paper cut from this morning healed completely within 5 minutes. Primary concern remains the energy surges tied to emotional state. Adrenaline, fear, and anger are the most potent catalysts. The internal hum acts as a reliable indicator of proximity to a discharge event. Hypothesis: the energy is not a quirk. It has no biological off switch. It is a permanent state of being. Containment is the only viable strategy. But how do you contain an emotion? He was a scientist studying his own time bomb, and he was running out of time. The end of the school day was the worst part. It was a 15-minute walk home, a gauntlet of potential triggers. Today, the air was heavy and humid, a promise of a coming storm that mirrored the one in his own chest. He had made it through another day, another 7 hours of clenching his fists and biting his tongue. He just wanted to get home, lock himself in his room, and breathe. He took a shortcut through a series of narrow, graffiti-scarred alleyways, hoping to avoid the main street crowds. It was a mistake. Well. Look what we found hiding in the trash. Izuku froze, his blood turning to ice. He didn't have to turn around to know who it was. The voice was accompanied by the sound of small, sharp explosions, like a string of firecrackers. He slowly turned to see Bakugo blocking the entrance to the alley, his two perpetual sycophants, the ones with the finger stretching and wing quirks, fanning out to cut off any escape. Bakugo's usual sneer was different today. It was sharper, edged with something that looked suspiciously like unease. The hospital incident, the shattered monitor, had clearly stuck with him. He was a predator that had seen its prey do something impossible, and his response was not caution, but a need to reassert dominance through overwhelming force. Still playing the quiet freak, Deku? Bakugo said, taking a slow step forward. His palms smoked, the sweet, acrid smell of nitroglycerin filling the cramped alley. You think you can just ignore me now? That because you survived a little boo-boo, the rules have changed? Izuku held up his hands, a placating gesture. I don't want any trouble, Kaken. His voice was trembling. He could feel the hum starting to climb, a low thrumming in his teeth. Breathe in for 4, hold for 7. That's your problem, isn't it? Bakugo spat. You never want trouble, you just are trouble. You're a bad omen. A quirkless, useless waste of space who tried to play hero and got turned into some kind of lab rat. He was closer now, close enough for Izuku to see the angry confusion in his eyes. What did they do to you in that hospital, huh? Pump you full of drugs? Did they give you a quirk? You can tell me. I can take it. They didn't do anything, Izuku insisted, backing away until his shoulders hit the cold, rough brick of the alley wall. A dead end. It was the accident. I don't know what it is. Please, just leave me alone. The plea was a match to gasoline. To Bakugo, a plea was an admission of weakness, and weakness was an invitation. Leave you alone? He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Not until you tell me the truth. You think you can have a secret and keep it from me? Everything you have, you owe to me not crushing you. Breathe. Don't engage. Don't feel. The hum was a roaring in his ears now. The edges of his vision felt tight. He could feel the dormant strength stirring in his limbs, a terrifying power aching to be used. He squeezed his eyes shut. Think of All Might. Smiling. Saving people. Control. Cat got your tongue, you damn nerd? Bakugo's voice was right in his ear, and then came the heat. Bakugo, in a final, decisive act of bullying, shoved his palm right in front of Izuku's face. He didn't make contact, but he didn't need to. He let off a small, contained, but brutally concussive explosion. Boom! The world became a kaleidoscope of pain and sensory overload. A blinding flash of orange light seared Izuku's retinas. The deafening bang rattled his skull, disorienting him completely. The wave of heat was intense, scorching his cheeks and singeing his eyebrows, the smell of burnt hair mixing with nitroglycerin. Pain, sharp and stinging, erupted across his face. It was the final straw. The careful, fragile dam of control Izuku had spent weeks building shattered into a million pieces. The combination of claustrophobic fear, the searing pain, and the sudden, violent shockwave of the explosion, all layered on top of a decade of repressed rage, humiliation, and despair, created the perfect, catastrophic storm. The hum in his blood didn't just rise. It detonated, A scream tore from Izuku's throat, but it wasn't his own. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated agony, a guttural roar that was both animal and machine. His vision, which had been blacked out by the flash, returned as a sickening, pulsing shade of emerald green. The pain of the transformation was absolute. It felt as if his very bones were being broken and forcibly reset into a new, larger frame. He could hear a horrifying symphony of wet snaps and tearing sounds coming from his own body. His muscles, flooded with gamma energy, ripped themselves apart only to weave back together, thicker, denser, and impossibly strong. What the hell? Bakugo stammered, stumbling back, his arrogant smirk replaced by a mask of slack-jawed horror. Izuku was on his knees, his body convulsing. His Aldera Junior High uniform, a symbol of his mundane suffering, began to protest. The seams of his black jacket strained, then ripped apart with a sound like tearing canvas. His white shirt shredded, revealing skin that was shifting from pale flesh to a mottled, sick green. His scrawny frame was expanding at an alarming rate, muscle and bone growing, swelling, filling the alleyway. He looked up, and the face was no longer that of Izuku Midoriya. The features were broader, more brutal. The eyes were no longer his own fearful green, but two raging emerald furnaces, burning with pure, instinctual fury. He let out another roar, this one not of pain, but of raw, untamed power. He pushed himself to his feet, and then kept rising. 6 feet. 7. 8. The top of his monstrous head scraped against the brickwork on either side of the alley. He was a titan of green flesh and raw muscle, a creature born of pain and rage. He was barely recognizable as human. Bakugo's two cronies were screaming, scrambling backwards over each other in a pathetic attempt to escape. Bakugo himself was frozen, his mind unable to process the abomination that his victim had become. The quirkless, useless Deku was gone. In his place was a monster from a nightmare. The creature, the berserker, looked down at the three smaller figures. It didn't see a rival. It didn't see bullies. It saw threats. It saw the source of the pain. Its rudimentary consciousness was a maelstrom of one single, primal emotion, rage. It raised a hand now the size of a car engine, and with a guttural grunt, it swatted. The motion wasn't malicious or calculated. It was dismissive. The way a person would swat a fly. The back of its hand connected with Bakugo's chest. The impact wasn't a punch. It was a collision with a living battering ram. Bakugo was launched through the air like a ragdoll, a choked cry escaping his lips as he flew 10 feet backwards and crashed into a large, overflowing metal dumpster with a deafening clang. He slumped down, unconscious, the wind knocked out of him, miraculously alive but utterly broken. The berserker turned its glowing green eyes on the other two boys, who were now sobbing in terror. It took a step, the asphalt cracking under its immense weight. But it wasn't focused on them. It was a cornered animal. The alley was too small, too tight. The rage needed release. The body needed to move. Panicked and confused, it turned to the wall beside it, the same brick wall Izuku had been pressed against moments before. With another world-shaking roar, it smashed its fist into the brickwork. The wall didn't just crack, it exploded outwards in a shower of dust and rubble. The berserker tore a massive, gaping hole in the side of the building, revealing the terrified occupants of a small noodle shop on the other side. It didn't care. It just needed out. It lumbered through the hole it had created, its massive shoulders demolishing the rest of the wall, and stumbled out onto a busier street, into the late afternoon sun. Its mind was a fog of instinct. Noise. Pain. Threat. Escape. It rampaged mindlessly, not attacking anyone, but simply moving. Cars swerved and crashed to avoid it. Pedestrians screamed and scattered. It was a force of nature, a green tsunami of muscle and fury, and it was cutting a path of destruction straight towards the city center. The shopping district was in chaos. Heroes were already on the scene. Death Arms was evacuating civilians, Kamui Woods was using his lacquered chains to create barriers, and Backdraft was trying to contain the fires. But their attention was focused on the primary threat, a villain made of viscous, foul-smelling sludge, who had a screaming, thrashing Aldera Junior High student trapped within its semi-liquid form. Bakugo, having come to in the dumpster with a gasp and a collection of fresh bruises, had foolishly tried to take on the villain himself and been captured. Now, he was suffocating, his own explosions doing more harm than good, merely churning the sludge around him. The heroes were at a standstill. The villain was volatile, Bakugo was a hostage, and there was no hero present with the right quirk to resolve the situation cleanly. All Might was in the crowd, his time limit for the day expired, his true form a secret shame as he watched, helpless. And then, a new sound cut through the din. It was a rhythmic, earth-shaking thump, 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 accompanied by the sounds of shattering concrete and the distant shriek of twisting metal. Kamui Woods turned from the sludge villain. "What is that?" A car, a small sedan, suddenly flew through the air, end over end, and crashed into a storefront 100 yards away. From the smoke and dust of the street the berserker had just demolished, a colossal green figure emerged. A collective gasp went through the crowd. The heroes stared, dumbfounded. It was larger than Death Arms, more monstrous than any villain they had seen outside of a high-level alert. Its skin was a deep, menacing green, crisscrossed with bulging veins that seemed to pulse with an inner light. Its eyes were twin emerald suns, burning with mindless fury. "Is that a villain?" Death Arms yelled, taking a defensive stance. "Did it come with the sludge guy?" No one had an answer. The berserker paid the heroes no mind. Its primitive senses were drawn to the center of the chaos. The explosions, the screams, the sight of a struggling figure trapped within a churning mass. It didn't recognize Bakugo. It didn't understand the concept of a villain, or a hostage. Its brain processed the scene in the simplest terms possible: small thing trapped. Big thing hurting it. Hurt the big thing. With a roar that cracked the windows of nearby buildings it charged. The sludge villain turned, its multiple, shifting eyes widening in what could only be described as shock. "What the?" It didn't have time to finish. The berserker closed the distance in 3 ground-shaking strides. It didn't try to punch the sludge, it simply collided with it. The impact was like a freight train hitting a water balloon. The sheer, unstoppable force of the berserker's charge sent a shockwave through the villain's body, momentarily liquefying its form and loosening its grip. Bakugo was flung free, gasping and sputtering, landing hard on the pavement. The sludge villain, furious, tried to reform and lash out, sending a tendril of slime to engulf the green giant's head. The berserker didn't even flinch. It reached up with its massive hands, grabbed the tendril, and just pulled. What followed was not a fight. It was a dismantlement. The sludge villain's body was a defense against blunt force trauma. But the berserker's strength was on a different plane of existence. It dug its fingers into the villain's core mass, where its eyes and mouth were, and began to tear. It ripped away huge handfuls of the viscous fluid and flung them aside, splattering them against buildings like obscene graffiti. The villain shrieked, a gurgling, terrified sound, as it was literally torn to pieces. Its quirk offered no defense against a creature that could simply rip its body apart faster than it could regenerate. In the crowd, All Might watched in skeletal form, his blue eyes wide with utter shock. He had been about to risk it, to force his transformation for a few precious seconds to save the boy. But now he was witnessing something impossible. This creature, it fought with a savagery he had never seen before. It wasn't the calculated cruelty of a villain like All for One. It was the pure, unthinking ferocity of a wild animal. It's not a Nomu, he thought, his analytical mind kicking in despite his awe. There's no command, no direction. It's pure instinct. With a final, enraged roar, the berserker grabbed the last struggling remnant of the sludge villain, the part containing its terrified, floating eyes, and slammed it into the ground with the force of a meteor. The asphalt cratered, and the villain dissolved into a harmless, stinking puddle, its consciousness finally knocked out. The berserker stood over its defeated foe, its massive chest heaving. It had won. It had stopped the threat. But the rage was still burning. The noise, the lights, the screaming people, it was all too much. It turned its head, its burning eyes sweeping over the terrified crowd. And then it saw her, standing behind a police barrier, her hand clamped over her mouth, her face pale with a terror so profound it was a physical blow. Inko Midoriya. She had been out shopping for groceries when the villain attack started, and had been trapped in the crowd. She was staring at the monster, her eyes filled with the same horror as everyone else. But in that instant, some flicker of Izuku's consciousness, buried deep within the raging beast, recognized her. Mom! The berserker's brain, a maelstrom of rage, was suddenly pierced by a new, utterly foreign feeling. Shame. Guilt. Horror. It saw the terror on its mother's face, and for the first time, it understood that the terror was directed at it. It saw the faces of the heroes, not with admiration, but with wary fear. It saw the civilians cowering. It was not a savior. It was a monster. The source of their fear. The rage, the fuel for the transformation, was instantly doused by a tidal wave of self-loathing. The fire in its eyes flickered and died. A pained, confused groan escaped its lips. The immense, powerful body began to tremble. The transformation reversed, but it was not a gentle process. It was a violent, painful collapse. The creature began to shrink, its muscles deflating, its bones cracking and groaning as they returned to their normal size. The green skin receded, leaving pale, trembling flesh in its place. In the center of the newly formed crater, the 8-foot titan of rage and power imploded, shrinking back into the form of a scrawny, 15-year-old boy, clad only in the tattered remains of his pants and shoes. Izuku Midoriya lay curled in a fetal position, naked to the waist, covered in dirt and grime. He was shaking uncontrollably, his body racked with deep, gut-wrenching sobs. The trauma of the transformation, the memory of the rage, the horrifying image of his mother's terrified face, it all crashed down on him at once. He was a monster. He had almost killed Kaken. He had destroyed property. He had terrified his own mother. The bustling street fell into a stunned, absolute silence. The heroes, the police, the civilians, even Bakugo, who had just managed to sit up, stared at the impossible scene. The green, city-destroying monster and the sobbing, pathetic boy were one and the same. All Might, still in his skeletal form, pushed his way through the stunned crowd. His mind was reeling. He had seen the boy before. On the news. The quirkless child who had survived the Takami Center incident. The boy who had rushed in to save the scientist. He stared at the weeping child in the crater, the living weapon of mass destruction, and a single, world-altering thought echoed in the hero's mind. What in the world are you? The silence was a physical thing, a heavy blanket of disbelief that smothered the street. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, the world was a frozen tableau, heroes staring, civilians gawking, and in the center of it all, a small, shivering boy weeping in a crater of his own making. The raw, primal terror the monster had invoked was now clashing with the profound, heart-wrenching pity one felt for the broken child. Then, the blanket was torn. The murmur started, a low wave of whispers that quickly grew into a cacophony of questions. Cameras, previously focused on the sludge villain, now turned their lenses on Izuku, the flashes like a new, merciless assault. The professional heroes, their shock giving way to protocol, began to advance. Stay back! Death Arms commanded, his voice booming. The subject is unstable. Kamui Woods extended a branch of wood, not as an attack, but as a cage, ready to ensnare the boy if he so much as twitched. They saw a threat. A volatile, unpredictable power that needed to be contained. From the edge of the crowd, Toshinori Yagi watched, his heart a block of ice in his chest. He saw their faces, saw the fear and suspicion. He knew what would happen next. The police would arrive with quirk-suppressing cuffs. The Hero Public Safety Commission would be alerted. This boy, this child who had just been through an unimaginable trauma, would be treated like a nuclear bomb, locked away in a laboratory for the rest of his life, studied and feared. A life sentence for a crime he never intended to commit. Toshinori had seen the news reports from the Takami Center. He had read the classified Hero Network brief on the incident. A quirkless boy with a heroic heart who threw himself into danger to save a stranger. He had been intrigued, even impressed. Now, seeing the catastrophic consequence of that incident, he felt a profound, aching responsibility. He couldn't transform. He had used up his time saving people from a collapsing building on the other side of town. He was just a skeletal man in an oversized suit, but a symbol of peace fought with more than just his fists. He moved. Pushing through the mesmerized crowd, he kept his head down, his posture unassuming. He pulled his baggy yellow jacket tighter around himself, a shroud of civilian anonymity. He reached the police barrier just as the first officers were stepping over it. "Excuse me! Excuse me, let me through!" he called out, his voice intentionally thin and reedy. An officer put a hand out to stop him. "Sir, this is an active scene. Please stay back." "That's my nephew," Tashinori lied, forcing a believable panic into his voice. He pointed a trembling finger at Izuku. "Izuku! Oh my God, Izuku! He has a condition, a rare stress-induced transformation disorder. He needs his medication." It was a wild, desperate gambit, a string of nonsense that shouldn't have worked. But in the chaos and sheer unbelievability of the situation, the lie was a handhold of logic. A disorder was something they could understand. A monster was not. The officer hesitated for a crucial second, and Tashinori slipped past him. He quickly shed his jacket as he half ran, half stumbled towards the crater. Izuku was still on the ground, his sobs having subsided into hitched, gasping breaths. He was staring at his own hands as if they were venomous snakes. "Kid! Hey, kid!" Tashinori's voice was low, urgent. Izuku looked up. His eyes, green and puffy from crying, widened slightly as he saw the strange, skeletal man approaching him. Tashinori didn't stop. He draped his large jacket over Izuku's trembling, dirt-streaked shoulders. The fabric was warm and smelled faintly of old books and something metallic. It was a simple, grounding act of kindness. An anchor in a sea of madness. "You need to come with me," Tashinori said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Right now. Before they decide what to do with you. Do you understand?" Izuku could only nod, his teeth chattering. The man's eyes, though sunken in shadow, held no fear, no disgust. Only a deep, powerful urgency. Izuku's traumatized mind, desperate for any port in the storm, latched onto it. "On your feet, son. We're going to walk. Don't run. Don't look at anyone. Just walk." He helped Izuku stand. The boy's legs were like jelly. Leaning heavily on the frail-looking man, Izuku allowed himself to be led away from the center of the devastation. The heroes were shouting, the police were closing in, but Tashinori navigated the chaos like a ghost, using the confusion of the crowd as a smokescreen. They slipped into a side street just as the first official containment team then screamed onto the scene. They didn't stop. Tashinori led him through a labyrinth of back alleys, the same kind of alley where this nightmare had begun. The distant wail of sirens was the only sound that followed them. Finally, after several minutes of hurried walking, Tashinori guided him to a rusted service door at the back of a nondescript office building. A few moments of fiddling with a lockpick he produced from his pocket, and they were inside, climbing flight after flight of dusty, concrete stairs. They emerged onto the flat, tar-papered roof of the building. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in bruised shades of orange and purple. The wind was cold up here, whipping at the oversized jacket draped over Izuku's shoulders and cutting through the tatters of his uniform. The sounds of the city, the sirens, the traffic, the life he had just irrevocably broken away from, seemed distant, a world away. Izuku finally collapsed, his back sliding down the wall of the roof access structure. He pulled his knees to his chest, wrapping his arms around them, trying to make himself as small as possible. The trembling had returned, full force. The skeletal man watched him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he sighed, a sound heavy with a weariness that seemed to go down to his bones. "You did a very brave thing today, young man," he said, his voice soft. "And a very dangerous one." Izuku flinched, shaking his head violently. "Brave? I wasn't brave. I was a monster." The word came out as a choked sob. "I almost killed Kaken. I saw the look on my mom's face. She was scared of me. Everyone, they were all scared of me." He looked up at the strange man, his eyes pleading, desperate for an answer that didn't exist. "What's wrong with me? What am I?" The man's gaze was piercing. "Why don't you tell me? Start from the beginning. The Takami Center." And so, it all came pouring out. In a raw, unfiltered torrent of words, Izuku confessed everything. He spoke of the blinding green light and the searing pain of the accident. He described the constant, unnerving hum in his bones, the feeling of a sleeping giant in his blood. He told him about the snapped pencils, the cracked plate, the terrifying surge of power that had shattered the hospital monitor. He recounted the alleyway, the searing heat of Bakugo's explosion, and the red curtain of rage that had descended over his mind. I didn't want to hurt him, Izuku whispered, tears streaming down his face again. The rage, it wasn't me. It was something else. It was like I was a passenger in my own body, watching this thing use my hands to destroy everything. It felt strong. It felt like it was protecting me, but its idea of protection is just smashing everything that causes pain. When I was in the crater, and I saw my mom, it was like I woke up, and the first thing I felt was how much I hated myself. He took a shuddering breath, the confession leaving him hollowed out. They told me at the hospital I was a biological unknown. A time bomb. They were right. I'm a monster who looks like a person. Toshinori listened to every word, his expression grim. The story was wilder, more tragic than he could have imagined. A quirkless boy, desperate to be a hero, gifted with a power that was the antithesis of heroism, a mindless, destructive rage. It was a cruel, cosmic joke. When Izuku was finished, an exhausted silence fell between them. Toshinori walked to the edge of the roof and looked out over the city, his back to the boy. You are not a monster, he said, his voice firm, carrying over the wind. You have a monster inside you. There's a difference. He turned around, and his gaze was intense. You know, you and I are more alike than you think. Izuku looked up, confused. What do you mean? We both know what it's like to have the world see you as one thing, Toshinori said, a wry, sad smile touching his lips, while you're hiding a frightening secret underneath. And then, to Izuku's utter astonishment, the man was enveloped in a sudden, thick cloud of steam. It billowed out from him with a loud hiss, like a pressure valve being released. The man's frail, skeletal form began to expand, to fill out. The baggy clothes grew taut. Shoulders broadened, muscles swelled, and the gaunt, sunken face was replaced by a chiseled jaw and a heroic, beaming smile that had been plastered on Izuku's bedroom wall his entire life. The steam cleared, and standing there, in the same oversized, now ridiculously tight-fitting clothes, was All Might. Izuku's brain simply stopped working. The world tilted on its axis. He stared, his mouth hanging open, his mind a frantic, screaming mess of denial and recognition. The blonde, V-shaped bangs, the piercing blue eyes, no longer shadowed by bone but blazing with life. The sheer, overwhelming presence of the number one hero. All Might? The name was a fragile whisper. The one and only, the hero said, though his trademark boom was subdued. He gestured to his own magnificent form. This is the image I sell to the world. The symbol of peace. A pillar of hope who is always smiling, always strong. Then, with another, smaller hiss of steam, he deflated. The magnificent hero shrank back down into the skeletal man, who coughed violently, a dribble of blood appearing at the corner of his mouth. He wiped it away with the back of his hand and lifted his shirt. There, on the left side of his torso, was a wound so horrific it made Izuku gasp. A swirling vortex of scarred, ruined tissue, a permanent, deep crater in the hero's body. It looked like something had tried to scoop out his insides. 5 years ago, Toshinori said, his voice now a low rumble of pain and memory, I fought a villain who did this to me. The fight was never made public. I took a blow that destroyed my stomach and wrecked my respiratory system. I've been living on borrowed time ever since. The symbol of peace you see on TV? That's me, running on fumes, for about 3 hours a day. The rest of the time, I'm this. He gestured to his emaciated form. This is my secret. My weakness. The monster I have to hide from the world. He let his shirt fall. He looked at Izuku, and for the first time, Izuku saw past the hero. He saw the man, tired, wounded, but with a will of iron shining in his eyes. He was sharing his deepest vulnerability, creating a bridge between them. You have a power inside you, young man, All Might continued, his tone shifting, becoming more serious. A power of immense, terrifying potential. I saw what you did to that villain. The raw, physical force was greater than anything I've ever witnessed, perhaps even greater than my own at its peak. But it's a wild, chaotic thing. It's a raging river in a flood, destroying everything in its path, the good, the bad, the innocent. Your heroic heart, the one that made you rush to save that scientist, the one that made you instinctively protect that boy in the sludge. It's like a flickering candle in the middle of that hurricane. Sooner or later, the storm will put it out. He took a step closer, his presence filling the rooftop. But what if it didn't have to be that way? What if you could build sturdy banks to contain that river? What if you could build a dam, to not only stop the flood, but to channel that incredible power and use it for good? Izuku stared, his mind finally catching up. How? How can I do that? It's not a quirk. I can't turn it off. It's tied to my anger, my fear. How can a hero be afraid or angry? Every hero is afraid. All Might declared, a spark of his heroic fire returning. And every hero gets angry. The difference is they control it. They use it. They channel it into righteous action. What you need, young Midoriya, is a framework. You need a power that is not about chaos, but about order. A power built not on raw energy, but on generations of control, willpower, and heroic sacrifice. This was it. The turning point of his entire existence. Young man, All Might said, his voice resonating with the weight of history. My quirk is not one I was born with. It is a sacred torch, passed down from one generation to the next. It is called One for All. He explained everything. The nature of the stockpiling power. Its origin. Its sacred duty to stand against the ultimate evil, a villain named All for One, the very man who had given him his scar. But his offer was different from the one he had originally intended to make to a successor. I had been searching for someone with a heroic spirit to inherit my power, All Might confessed. But you represent a different kind of need. Your gamma energy is pure, untamed power. One for All is more than that. It is the culmination of the wills of 8 heroes who came before me. It is a structured, disciplined energy. It is strength, yes, but it is also control incarnate. He looked Izuku directly in the eye, his gaze unwavering. I believe that One for All can act as the sturdy banks for your raging river. I believe its structured energy can create a spiritual and physical scaffolding inside of you. It can reinforce your will, giving you an anchor in the storm of your own emotions. It can teach you, from the inside out, how to contain, control, and eventually master the beast you fear so much. He held out his hand. I am offering you a lifeline, young Midoriya. Not just a chance to be the hero you've always dreamed of being, but a chance to tame the monster within so that you can be that hero. It will be a burden unlike any other. Your journey will be twice as hard as any other hero's. You will not just be fighting villains, you will be fighting yourself every single day, but I will be there to teach you. I will help you. I am offering you a chance to take control of your life. Do you accept? The setting sun cast All Might in a golden, heroic silhouette. He was offering everything. Not just a quirk. Not just a dream. He was offering hope. He was offering a cure for the curse that had been inflicted upon him. Tears welled in Izuku's eyes once more, but these were not tears of despair. They were tears of pure, unadulterated hope. The crushing weight on his soul seemed to lift, replaced by the terrifying, exhilarating weight of a new purpose. The path forward was no longer an empty, terrifying void. It was a steep, treacherous mountain, but there was a path, and the greatest hero in the world was offering to be his guide. Yes, Izuku choked out, the word barely a sound. He scrambled to his feet and bowed low, the oversized jacket pooling around him. Yes, All Might. I accept. A genuine, warm smile spread across Tashinori's face. Excellent. He then plucked a single strand of his golden hair. Now, for the slightly undignified part of this sacred ceremony. He held it out to Izuku. Eat this. The next 10 months were a baptism by fire. The location for his training was the Goba Municipal Beach Park, a stretch of coastline that had been turned into an illegal junkyard over the years. It was a mountain range of rusting appliances, broken furniture, and mountains of forgotten trash, all set against the backdrop of the sea. It was a scar on the face of the city. Why here? Izuku had asked on the first day, coughing from the dust. To be a hero is to engage in public service. All Might had boomed, before shrinking down to Tashinori. But for you, this place is also a metaphor. It's chaos. neglect. A mess that seems impossible to clean up. Just like the power inside you. By cleaning this beach, you will be performing a service for the city, yes. But you will also be training your body and, more importantly, your mind. You will bring order to this chaos, just as you will bring order to your own soul. The training regimen Toshinori designed was grueling, bordering on inhuman. It wasn't just about making Izuku's body a suitable vessel for one for all. His gamma-infused cells already provided a superhumanly durable foundation. This was about pushing his limits, about expanding the vessel itself. The physical part was brutal. Izuku hauled refrigerators, dragged cars, and lifted mountains of scrap metal. The goal wasn't just strength, it was endurance. All might would push him past the point of exhaustion, forcing him to keep going when his muscles screamed and his lungs burned. Your transformation is a fail-safe. Toshinori would yell, coaching him from atop a pile of discarded televisions. Your body's response to overwhelming physical or emotional stress. We need to raise the threshold for what your body considers overwhelming. We need to make this agony, this exhaustion, your new baseline. When your limit is this high, you'll be less likely to lose control over a minor frustration. But the physical training was only half the battle. The other half was a war waged in the quiet of his own mind. Every morning before the sun rose, Izuku would sit cross-legged on the sand amidst the garbage, and meditate. Toshinori, surprisingly well-versed in mindfulness techniques, guided him. Don't fight the hum, young Midoriya, he'd advise, his voice calm. Don't try to silence it. That's like trying to hold back the tide. Acknowledge it. Listen to it. Feel its rhythm. Understand it as a part of you, like your own heartbeat. It is not your enemy. It is simply power. You are the one who decides if it is a fire that burns you down, or a fire that forges you into steel. The hardest part was the emotional regulation training. After a grueling physical session, when Izuku was exhausted, sore, and emotionally raw, Toshinori would sit with him. And he would be cruel. You're pathetic, you know that? He'd say, his voice cold, using the same sneering tone as Bakugo. A quirkless weakling who stumbled into a power he can't handle. You'll never be a hero. You'll only ever be a monster. One bad day and you'll level a city block. You'll hurt your mother. You'll kill someone. The first time he did it, Izuku felt the familiar, hot surge of rage. His vision tinged green, and the hum in his bones roared. He clenched his fists, ready to explode. There it is! Toshinori snapped. Feel it. That's the river cresting its banks. Now do not suppress it. Channel it. Use the precepts of one for all, the will to save, the spirit of sacrifice. Build the banks higher. Take that rage and tell it to stand down. You are its master, not the other way around. Painfully, agonizingly, Izuku would fight himself. He would focus on All Might's words, on the feeling of one for all. A warm, steady glow now settled deep in his stomach, and he would breathe. He would force the green-tinged rage back from the edges of his vision, forcing the roaring hum back down to a manageable thrum. He would end these sessions shaking and sweating, more exhausted than after hauling a dozen washing machines. But each time, the control came a little easier. The banks of the river were being built, stone by painful stone. He was learning to live with the weight of two worlds inside him, the chaotic, raging power of a gamma god, and the ordered, heroic legacy of one for all. One was a storm, the other a lighthouse, and he, Izuku Midoriya, was the rocky shore upon which they clashed. His goal for the UA entrance exam was no longer just to pass. It was to prove, to All Might and to himself, that he could stand in the heart of his own hurricane, and not be blown away. The 10 months of relentless, soul-crushing training had remade Izuku Midoriya. He was still lean, still shorter than most boys his age, but the frail, perpetually hunched posture was gone. It had been replaced by a coiled, dense strength, a wiry resilience forged in the junkyards of Dagoba Beach. The fat had been burned away, replaced by hard, functional muscle etched onto his frame from hauling a decade's worth of society's refuse. The change was more than just physical. The frantic, fearful energy in his eyes had been tempered, banked like a forge's coals. It was still there, a flicker of the emerald inferno within, but it was now overlaid with a quiet, hard-won focus. The morning of the UA entrance exam, he stood before the newly pristine shoreline of Dagoba Beach. The sun rose over a clean expanse of sand, glinting off a calm sea. Every last piece of garbage was gone. He had moved a mountain, piece by piece. Toshinori, in his skeletal form, stood beside him, a rare, genuinely proud smile on his face. You did it, my boy. You brought order to chaos. He clapped a bony hand on Izuku's shoulder. Today, you're not just taking an exam. You are showing the world, and more importantly yourself, that you are in control. Izuku took a deep breath, the salty air filling his lungs. He could feel the two powers coiling within him, a strange and volatile symbiosis. One for all was a warm, steady sun in the core of his being, a hum of controlled potential. The gamma energy was a vaster, wilder thing, a deep, oceanic current that flowed through his blood and bones. For months, he had practiced keeping them separate but cooperative. He hadn't yet tried to truly wield one for all. All Might had been adamant about that. His body was a vessel, but it was still a fragile one. Attempting to channel the full, explosive power of OFA would be like setting off dynamite in a glass bottle. Instead, OFA served a different purpose. It was his anchor. His mental fortress. When the gamma energy threatened to surge, he would focus on the steady warmth of OFA, using its inherent order to calm the storm, to keep the raging river within its banks. I still haven't used the power offensively, Izuku said, a tremor of nervousness in his voice. Not once since that day. That was by design, Toshinori said gently. We had to build the dam before we could even think about opening the floodgates. Today, you will open them. Just a crack. Remember the new form we've been practicing. Not the berserker. Never the berserker. Just the aura. Channel your focus, your determination, not your rage. Let the energy coach you. Use it as a shield, as a strength enhancer. Let it be an extension of your will, not a replacement for it. Izuku nodded, his jaws set. The Gamma Aura, as they'd taken to calling it, was the first step toward true mastery. It was a state where he consciously drew on the gamma energy, letting it saturate his immediate vicinity, and wreath his body in a visible, crackling field of emerald light. It offered a significant boost to his physical abilities without the catastrophic loss of self that came with a full transformation. It was, in essence, his version of a quirk activation, but it required immense concentration. The line between channeling the energy and being consumed by it was razor thin. He bowed to Toshinori. I won't let you down. You already haven't, young Midoriya. The gates of UA High School were titanic, a monument to the institution's prestige. They were designed to inspire awe, but for Izuku, they were a gateway to judgment. He was surrounded by a sea of confident teenagers, each one buzzing with the energy of their unique quirks. He saw a girl with pink skin and horns, a boy with multiple arms, and dozens of others whose powers were less obvious but whose self-assured gaits spoke volumes. He clutched the straps of his yellow backpack, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. The sheer number of people, the bubbling, competitive atmosphere, it was a sensory overload. The familiar, low hum in his bones began to rise, a warning thrum. Breathe in for 4. Hold for 7. Exhale for 8. He focused on the steady warmth of OFA, a tiny sun in a sea of anxiety. Out of my way, Deku. The voice was a splash of ice water. Izuku stumbled aside as Katsuki Bakugo shoved past him. Bakugo hadn't spoken a word to him in 10 months, not since the day of the alley and the sludge monster. Their interactions had been limited to cold, hateful glares across the classroom. But the hatred was different now. It was no longer just contempt for a perceived weakling. It was laced with a deep, unsettling fear and a burning, confused anger. He was looking at Izuku not as a pebble, but as an unexploded bomb. Izuku watched him go, feeling a pang of the old fear, but it was muted now. It wasn't the all-consuming terror of before. It was just a memory. He had faced down the monster in his own soul for 10 months. Bakugo's anger seemed almost trivial in comparison. He took a step forward, his resolve hardening, and promptly tripped over his own feet. He flailed, a pinwheel of arms and legs, bracing for a painful, embarrassing impact with the pavement. It never came. He stopped, suspended in midair, a strange, light feeling in his stomach. Whoa, you okay? A bright, cheerful voice asked. Sorry for using my quirk on you without asking, but it'd be bad luck to fall right before the exam, right? He was gently set back on his feet. He turned to see a girl with a round, kind face and a short, brown bob. Her cheeks had a permanent, rosy blush. She beamed at him, a smile so genuine it was disarming. Oh. Thank you. Izuku stammered, his face flushing crimson. That was, wow. Nervous? Me too. She chirped, bouncing on the balls of her feet. It's a lot, isn't it? Well, good luck in there. With another bright smile, she jogged off toward the auditorium, leaving Izuku standing there, his heart doing a different kind of frantic dance. He shook his head, a small smile touching his lips. He focused on the warmth of that small, kind interaction and used it to push back the anxiety. He was ready. The written portion of the exam was a breeze. His analytical mind, honed by years of quirk analysis and now sharpened by 10 months of intense, focused training, tore through the questions. But it was the silence of the exam hall, the tense scratching of hundreds of pencils, that set his nerves on edge. He could feel the hum, a constant companion, waiting. The practical exam orientation was held in a massive auditorium. The pro-hero present Mike was on stage, his voice a deafening wave of enthusiasm that rattled Izuku's teeth. He explained the rules, a 10-minute mock battle and a massive, cityscape replica. There were 3 types of robots, worth 1, 2, or 3 points respectively. The goal was to rack up as many villain points as possible. A tall, serious-looking boy with dark blue hair and engines in his calves stood up to ask a pointed question about a 4th, unmentioned robot on the handout, and then admonished Izuku for his quiet, nervous muttering. The public chastising sent a spike of humiliation through him, and the hum in his blood rose sharply. Breathe. Center. Anchor. He closed his eyes and focused on the warmth of OFA, forcing the energy back down. He was a tightly coiled spring, and the slightest thing could set him off. They were loaded onto buses and taken to their designated battle centers. Izuku found himself at Battle Center B, standing before another set of colossal gates. The kind-faced girl from the entrance was there, looking just as nervous as he felt. He wanted to go over and thank her properly, but the serious boy with the engines appeared and put a hand on his shoulder. You were attempting to distract that girl to sabotage her, weren't you? He said, his voice low and accusatory. What? No. This is not a place for games, the boy said, his hand tightening. If you are not going to take this seriously, you should leave. The condescension, the public accusation, it was another spark. Izuku felt a hot flash of anger. His vision flickered with a faint green tint. The hum became a low growl. He could feel the power begging for release, just a little bit. He could snap the boy's hand off his shoulder without a thought. Control, Izuku. You are the master. He took a sharp, deliberate breath. I am taking this seriously, he said, his voice dangerously level. Now please take your hand off me. There was an edge to his voice, a quiet intensity that made the other boy flinch and withdraw his hand as if he'd been burned. And stay art. Present Mick's voice blasted from hidden speakers. Izuku was jolted from his confrontation. While everyone else stood around, confused, Izuku remembered All Might's words. Heroes don't wait for a starting gun. He exploded into motion. His legs, powered by months of training, carried him through the gates at a speed that left the other examinees in the dust. He was the first one into the city. The streets of the mock city were narrow, lined with towering, empty buildings. It was a concrete canyon designed for chaos. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and the nervous sweat of teenagers. He rounded a corner and came face to face with his first opponent. A one-point robot, a sleek, green machine on a single tread, rolled towards him, its red optical sensor glowing. Its machine guns whirred to life. This was it. The first test. Don't let the rage take over. Use determination. Use the will to succeed. Channel it. Izuku closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. He reached inward, past the anxiety, past the anger, and found the fierce, burning core of his ambition. The desperate, all-consuming need to prove he was not a monster. To prove he was a hero. He pulled on that feeling, and the gamma energy answered. A wave of emerald light erupted from him. It wasn't an explosion, it was a release. A crackling, semi-transparent aura of green energy enveloped his body, tracing the lines of his muscles. The air around him shimmered. His hair floated slightly, and his eyes began to glow with a steady, controlled emerald light. The hum was no longer just in his bones, it was a visible, audible force field. This was his gamma aura. The robot fired. The rubber bullets, which would have left nasty welts on normal skin, splattered harmlessly against the shimmering green field of energy around him. They didn't even make him flinch. He felt a surge of incredible strength, a power that made his 10 months of training feel like a warm-up. He pushed off the ground, the asphalt cracking under his feet, and closed the 20-foot distance in a single bound. He didn't use finesse. He didn't have a practiced fighting style. All he had was overwhelming force. He drew his fist back and slammed it into the robot's torso. The sound was not a metallic clang, but a deafening crump. The robot's metal chassis didn't just dent, it imploded. The machine buckled inwards, folding around his fist like wet cardboard, before being blasted backwards into a wall, a twisted, sparking ruin. Izuku stood there for a second, panting, looking at his hand. It was vibrating with residual energy. There was no pain. No broken bones. The aura had protected him. A wide, incredulous grin spread across his face. It worked. He didn't waste another moment. He became a green-reed wrecking ball. His movements were clumsy, inefficient, and utterly devastating. He was a brawler, not a martial artist. He sprinted through the streets, his aura protecting him from projectiles as he smashed through robot after robot. A two-pointer would try to ambush him from an alley. He would simply grab it by its cannon arm and rip it clean off, then beat the machine into scrap with its own weapon. A three-pointer, a larger, more heavily armored machine, would charge him. He would meet it head-on, his smaller form stopping the behemoth dead in its tracks before he caved its head in with a single, brutal punch. The other examinees could only stare in awe and terror. They saw a flickering green comet of destruction tearing through their battlefield. He was racking up points at an astonishing rate, but it was taking a toll. Maintaining the gamma aura was a marathon of mental endurance. Every second required him to actively focus his will, to keep the vast ocean of power channeled into a controlled stream. With every robot he destroyed, the adrenaline, the thrill of the fight, threatened to turn his determination into bloodlust. The emerald aura would flicker, sometimes intensifying, threatening to bubble over into a physical transformation. Each time, he would grit his teeth, focusing on the calm warmth of OFA in his gut, using it to wrestle the power back under his control. He was fighting a war on two fronts, against the robots outside, and the monster within. He had just smashed his way through a trio of two-pointers, bringing his unofficial count to a staggering 56 points, when the ground began to shake. A shadow fell over the street, so vast it plunged the entire block into twilight. The other students stopped fighting, their heads craning upwards in fear. Izuku looked up, his glowing eyes widening. It was the zero-pointer. The gimmick. The arena trap. But the handout hadn't done it justice. It was a colossus, a mechanical titan that towered over the tallest buildings in the cityscape. Its armor was thick, its single, crimson eye the size of a bus. It was a walking skyscraper of pure, intimidating force. That's insane, a nearby student stammered before turning to run. It's not worth any points. We have to get away. Everyone began to flee. It was the logical choice. The zero-pointer was an obstacle, not an objective. Izuku, his aura flickering with exhaustion, turned to run as well. There was no point in fighting it. Then he heard a cry. Ow! He whipped his head around. There, lying on the ground directly in the path of the advancing giant, was the kind girl with the brown hair. She was trapped, her leg pinned beneath a large chunk of rubble, likely dislodged by the zero-pointer's emergence. She was desperately trying to pull herself free, her face pale with terror as the robot's massive tread ground closer, threatening to crush her into paste. In that instant, the logic of the exam, the points, the need for control, it all vanished. All Izuku saw was a person in danger. The same primal, heroic instinct that had made him run for Dr. Thorne, that had made his monstrous form attack the sludge villain, surged to the forefront. But this time, it was different. It wasn't just blind instinct. It was a conscious choice. I have to save her. That singular, desperate thought was the trigger. The desire to save, the desperate, protective rage at the injustice of her predicament, was a far more potent fuel than simple determination. The gamma energy within him responded with volcanic force. The shimmering aura around him exploded. It wasn't a gentle coating anymore. The energy began to pour into his physical form. His controlled breathing turned into a guttural roar as the transformation took hold. But it wasn't the same. It wasn't the mindless, agonizing shift of the alleyway. The 10 months of training, the internal anchor of One for All, it was all acting as a governor. A focusing lens. He didn't lose himself. But he began to grow. His muscles swelled, his uniform, already strained, finally giving way as his shoulders and chest broadened. He shot up in height, growing a few feet in a matter of seconds. His skin didn't turn fully green, but took on a sickly, verdant pallor, and thick, emerald veins pulsed with light all over his body. His face, however, remained his own. His features were stretched, more angular and feral, but his eyes, though blazing with furious green energy, were still recognizably his. They were filled not with mindless rage, but with fierce, unwavering purpose. He had become a demigod of destruction, a perfect, terrible fusion of the boy and the beast. He looked at his hands, now larger, more powerful. He looked at the girl. He looked at the approaching zero-pointer. Then he crouched, the ground beneath his feet spiderwebbed with cracks. He poured every ounce of the surging gamma energy into his legs and jumped. He didn't just leap. He flew. He shot into the air like a green missile, covering the distance to the zero-pointer's head in a single, breathtaking arc. He soared past the 10th, 20th, 30th story of the surrounding buildings, a streak of emerald fury against the sky. As he reached the apex of his jump, level with the robot's colossal head, he saw its single red eye focus on him. He drew back his right arm, the muscles coiling, the green energy concentrating in his fist until it shone like a star. He remembered Toshinori's training, the countless punches thrown at rusted washing machines. But this was different. This was all the power, all the desperation, all the hope, focused into a single point. He let out a roar that was both his and the monster's, a sound of heroic defiance. Gamma smash! His fist connected with the zero-pointer's faceplate. The result was not a punch. It was an extinction-level event. A shockwave of pure, green concussive force erupted from the point of impact. The air itself seemed to shatter. The robot's head didn't just dent, it atomized. The entire upper torso of the mechanical giant was obliterated in a blinding flash of emerald light, the explosion so powerful it created a momentary vacuum. The rest of the robot's body, now headless and hollowed out, froze in place for a second before beginning a slow, majestic collapse away from him. The backlash was instantaneous and agonizing. Channeling that much raw, untamed power through his arm without the full structural support of One for All was catastrophic. He felt a series of sickening, wet snaps as every bone in his right arm, from his knuckles to his shoulder, shattered simultaneously. An even more jarring crunch echoed up from his legs as the force of the impact traveled through his body, breaking his femurs. The gamma energy its purpose served receded with the pain, his body shrinking back to its normal size in midair. The demigod was gone. He was just Izuku Midoriya again, broken and powerless, plummeting from a height of over 50 stories. The world was a dizzying blur. He was going to die. He had saved the girl, but he was going to splatter on the pavement. A strange sense of calm washed over him. He had done it. He had used his power to save someone. He closed his eyes. Slap! A sharp, stinging sensation on his cheek. His fall suddenly, violently stopped. He was floating again, his body screaming in protest at the sudden lack of momentum. He cracked open an eye to see the round face of the girl he had just saved, looking down at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. She was holding onto a piece of debris, looking horribly nauseous. Release! She gasped, and they both began to fall again, but only for a few feet before she slapped his cheek again, reactivating her zero-gravity quirk. By releasing and reactivating her power on him, she was killing his downward momentum, using herself as a human parachute. They floated gently the last few feet to the ground just as the buzzer sounded, signaling the end of the exam. Izuku lay on the ground, his limbs twisted at unnatural angles, every nerve ending on fire. The pain was breathtaking, but through it, he saw the girl get up and rush to his side. She looked down at him, a mixture of awe, gratitude, and concern on her face. "You saved me," she whispered. He managed a weak, pained smile. "Guess we're even," he wheezed, before his world finally went dark. He awoke to the smell of antiseptic and the gentle, sweet taste of gummies. His eyes fluttered open to see a tiny, elderly woman in a doctor's coat peering down at him. Recovery girl, the youthful heroine. She popped another gummy bear into her mouth. "Oh, good. You're awake," she said, her voice a strange mix of grandmotherly kindness and stern disapproval. "You gave us all quite a scare, young man. I've healed broken bones before, but yours, it was like trying to knit powder back together. The amount of destructive energy you must have pushed through your own body is astonishing. And frankly, idiotic." Izuku tried to sit up and was surprised to find that he could. He looked down at his arms and legs. They were fine. Sore but whole. "Your body has a remarkable natural healing factor," Recovery Girl continued, tapping her cane on the floor. "The nanites in your cells, saturated with that strange energy, seem to aggressively repair any damage. I just had to give you a little jump start with my quirk. But don't think that gives you a license to be reckless. A quirk, or whatever you have, that destroys your own body is no quirk at all. It's a liability. You need to learn control." Her lecture, though stern, was music to his ears. Control. That was the entire point. He had lost it at the end, yes. But it had been in the service of saving someone. He had bent the power to his will, even if it had broken him in the process. He had passed the test. Not Yue's test. His own. Later that day, Toshinori visited him in the empty nurse's office, carrying a small bag of convenience store pastries. He looked tired but was beaming. "The results aren't officially out yet," he said, handing a melon bread to Izuku, "but I have some friends in the teacher's lounge. You got 56 villain points, more than enough to pass on its own." Izuku's heart soared. But Toshinori continued, his smile widening, "That's not all. You see, the exam wasn't just about smashing robots. There was a hidden metric. The truest measure of a hero." He pulled out a small tablet and played a video. It was security footage from the exam. It showed the girl, Uraraka Ochiko, pleading with President Mike after the exam to give some of her points to Izuku. "He saved my life," her voice cried from the tablet's tiny speaker. "He took out the 0-pointer to save me. He deserves all the points." The video then cut to other students, talking to the judges. "That green energy kid, at first I thought he was just a monster," said a boy with spiky red hair. "But then he jumped. He didn't hesitate. That was the most heroic thing I've ever seen." Toshinori paused the video. "Hero points, my boy. Awarded by the judges for acts of courage, altruism, and self-sacrifice. You saved another examinee at great personal risk. They awarded you 60 hero points." He looked at Izuku, his sunken eyes shining with pride. 56 villain points. 60 hero points. A total of 116. You didn't just pass, young Midoriya. You got the highest score in the history of this exam." Izuku stared, speechless. The pastry fell from his numb fingers. All the pain, all the training, all the fear, it had all been worth it. He had not only controlled the power, he had used it to be a hero. He had done the impossible. But as he sat there, a deep, aching soreness still resonating in his bones, he knew this was just the beginning. Recovery Girl was right. He couldn't afford to save people at the cost of shattering his own body every time. He had built the dam, and he had opened the floodgates just a crack. Now, he had to learn how to build a hydroelectric power plant. He had to learn how to truly wield both powers, not just as a weapon or an anchor, but as one. He had gotten into UA. The real training was about to begin.